Zelna's antennae twitched nervously as the emergency lights bathed the consortium monitoring station in pulsating crimson. She had worked here for 3 standard cycles, but never had she witnessed such a reaction, not even during the Cygnus Nebula collapse or the Tarkanian diplomatic crisis. Systems breach. Void anomaly. She asked her supervisor, the 6-limbed Valaxian named Hezrith. Hezrith's compound eyes remained fixed on the central display where 3 words flashed with menacing simplicity. Human vessel DTCT. Much worse, Hezrith whispered, 2 of his manipulator limbs trembling slightly. Section 7, Emergency Protocol Lambda. Now, around them, the monitoring hub descended into controlled chaos. Senior analysts abandoned workstations mid-calculation. Security personnel activated personal shields, a violation of station energy conservation protocols. Through the transparent ceiling dome, Selma observed defense platforms shifting position, their energy matrices glowing as weapon systems charge. All this for a single vessel. Zelna hurried to her station in Section 7, fingers dancing across the biometric interface. Emergency Protocol Lambda required all communications officers to monitor subspace channels for irregular transmission patterns. Her mismatched eyes, one amber, one pale blue, a genetic anomaly that had marked her as different among her own people, rapidly scanned frequency bands. The quarantine boundary was absolute, muttered Trelek, the ancient Moridian who occupied the workstation beside hers. His leathery skin had wrinkled with age, but his mind remained sharp. 300 cycles of containment, and now they breach. The arrogance is typical. The humans, Zelna ventured, keeping her voice low. I've only read basic xenobiology texts about them. Bipedal primates, oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere dependency, carbon-based. Texts sanitized for public consumption. Trelek interrupted with a dismissive wave of his spectral hand. I was junior tactical analyst during the containment resolution. What those creatures did with primitively armed exploration vessels. His voice trailed off, eyes unfocused in recollection. Zelna's curiosity overwhelmed her professional caution. What precisely did they do? Trelek glanced around before leaning closer. The last time humans left their system, 3 worlds were forever changed. Not destroyed, changed. That's what makes them dangerous. Any species can destroy. Humans transform. They introduce variables. The central display updated with the human vessel's trajectory. It moved unlike any ship Selna had studied, making micro-adjustments that served no apparent navigational purpose, accelerating and decelerating in patterns that defied efficient fuel consumption models. Look at that flight path, Trelek whispered. No logic. No pattern our predictive algorithms can map. 300 cycles in isolation, and they still fly like prey animals evading predators that don't exist. Zelna should have focused on her assigned monitoring task, but something about the human vessel's movement fascinated her. While consortium ships followed optimized flight paths, calculated to 15 decimal places, this craft moved almost organically, like a living thing responding to instinct rather than calculation. When her shift ended 6 hours later, Zelna made a decision that contradicted every behavior protocol in her personnel file. Instead of retiring to her quarters, she redirected to the historical archives subsection, using her communications clearance to access records normally restricted to senior analysts. The search term, Human Containment Incident, returned dozens of sealed files. Most required authorization far beyond her clearance, but one, a fragmentary visual record from a damaged consortium cruiser, had been improperly categorized. The file opened with minimal resistance. The timestamp indicated recording from 287 cycles past. The visual showed a modestly sized vessel of unfamiliar design surrounded by 3 consortium warships. Standard containment formation. But what happened next defied comprehension. The human vessel, already damaged and venting atmosphere, suddenly accelerated directly toward the lead warship. Collision seemed inevitable. A suicidal gesture. Then, at the last possible moment, the human craft executed a maneuver that Selma replayed 7 times in disbelief. It somehow used the warship's own gravitational compensators to slingshot around it, simultaneously disrupting the warship's sensor array with a precisely timed electromagnetic pulse from its damaged engine core. The recording ended abruptly, but the file contained a final notation. Containment protocol established. Sol system quarantine. Zelma sat motionless, her mismatched eyes wide. The humans hadn't been quarantined because they were aggressive predators. They had been contained because they were unpredictable. In a consortium built upon perfect order and calculation, unpredictability was the most dangerous force in the universe. And now they had returned. The restricted archive section remained eerily quiet as Selma delved deeper into humanity's history. She had fabricated a security override using communications protocols never intended for this purpose, a creative misapplication that would have horrified her instructors at the academy. A soft chime indicated another file decryption complete. This one contained xenobiological assessments of Earth, humanity's homeworld. The images made her pause. Churning oceans, violent weather systems, tectonic instability, and extreme temperature variations. Most spacefaring species evolved on worlds with stable environments that encouraged specialization. Humans emerged from a planet that punished specialization and rewarded adaptability. Physiological anomalies consistent with evolutionary pressure from multiple extinction-level events. Read 1 analysis. Subject species demonstrates unprecedented neural plasticity and redundant biological systems. Zelma scrolled through comparative evolutionary charts, while consortium species followed predictable development paths, each adaptation building logically upon previous changes. The human evolutionary tree looked like a chaotic explosion of abandoned experiments and contradictory adaptations. Most concerning, noted a senior xenobiologist, subjects can hold contradictory cognitive frameworks simultaneously without experiencing neural distress. This allows for situational ethics, contextual logic shifts, and decision matrices that incorporate fundamentally opposed variables. A classified addendum explained in simpler terms. They can believe 2 conflicting things at once and function normally. Our predictive models cannot account for this. Zelma's research was interrupted by a notification pulse. The Rigel trading hub, where the human vessel appeared to be heading, had instituted emergency lockdown procedures. All non-essential personnel were being evacuated. As a junior communications officer from the monitoring station, Selma would be considered non-essential, unless she wasn't at the monitoring station. The maintenance shuttle departing for Rigel in 30 minutes would need communication support. Zelma quickly forged authorization credentials, surprised at how easily station protocols yielded to creative manipulation. Was this how humans thought all the time? 16 hours later, the shuttle docked at Rigel's secondary maintenance bay. Zelma blended among the technical crews, her mismatched eyes hidden behind standard-issue technical goggles. The station hummed with nervous energy, rumors spreading faster than official communications. She accessed a data terminal in a quiet utility corridor, searching for updates on the human vessel. It had established standard orbit around Rigel, but had yet to request docking privileges. Curious. "They're scanning us," came a voice behind her. Zelma turned to find an elderly Tyrellian engineer studying a maintenance panel. His 4 eyes blinked in sequential patterns indicating anxiety. "The humans," he continued without looking at her. "They're scanning everything. Power distribution, structural integrity, defense capabilities. Not with standard sensors, either. They're using gravitational fluctuations to map internal spaces." "How is that possible?" Zelma asked, forgetting she should maintain cover. The Tyrellian finally looked at her, noticing her non-maintenance uniform beneath her technical vest. He seemed too tired to care about security protocols. "That's the problem with humans," he said quietly. "They make impossible things possible by simply not recognizing the impossibility. I worked salvage recovery after the containment incident. Their damaged vessels contain technology that shouldn't work, not because it violated physical laws, but because no sane engineer would attempt such configurations. He turned back to his panel. The quarantine wasn't about protecting us from their aggression. It was about protecting us from their ideas. An alert echoed through the station. The human vessel had finally requested docking permission. More shocking, they had somehow already adapted their airlocks to consortium specifications without being provided technical data. Zelna made a decision. She needed to see these humans herself. As she slipped away toward the primary docking ring, emergency meetings were convening throughout the station. The consortium's emergency council faced an impossible situation. A quarantined species had returned, seemingly unperturbed by the containment measures that should have kept them isolated for millennia. Even more troubling, preliminary scans suggested the human vessel had already adapted countermeasures against standard consortium quarantine procedures. Somehow, they had anticipated technologies that didn't exist when they were originally contained. 300 cycles of isolation hadn't diminished humanity's unpredictability. It had only given them time to refine it. The diplomatic reception chamber aboard Rigel Station had been hastily reconfigured. Defensive scanners disguised as decorative elements lined the walls. Emergency force field generators hummed quietly beneath the ornate floor panels. Security personnel outnumbered diplomats 3-1, their weapons concealed but powered. From her position inside a maintenance duct overlooking the chamber, Zelna had an unobstructed view of the proceedings. She hadn't planned on becoming a spy, merely an observer, but circumstances had forced improvisation. The human delegation would arrive any moment. Below, the consortium representatives arranged themselves according to strict protocol. Ancient Vulder representatives, their crystalline bodies refracting light in patterns conveying extreme caution, positioned themselves farthest from the entry door. The amorphous Telex, contained within their environmental suits, established a neutral buffer zone. Most intriguing was the Mithran observer who stood alone. The secretive Mithrans rarely participated in diplomatic functions. "Be advised," announced the station's security director. "Human delegation approaching central airlock. Biohazard protocols active." The chamber fell silent. Selna's antennae detected subtle shifts in electromagnetic fields as personal shields activated discreetly throughout the room. The doors slid open. Zelna had studied xenobiology records, but nothing prepared her for the reality of humans. They appeared almost disappointingly ordinary, bipedal, symmetrical, lacking obvious defensive adaptations. 5 of them entered, wearing simplified versions of consortium formal attire that somehow seemed both respectful and slightly incorrect, as if translated through an imperfect algorithm. The lead human, distinguishable by subtle markings on their attire, stepped forward with a facial expression Selna's implanted translator identified as smile, indication of positive intent or amusement. This expression, absent from most consortium species, created immediate cognitive dissonance among the diplomats. High representatives of the Galactic Consortium, the humans spoke in perfect consortium standard, their vocal modulation conveying both respect and subtle confidence. "I am Captain Eleanor Chen of the Earth vessel Horizon. We bring greetings after 3 centuries of separation." The Vulder senior diplomat's crystalline surface flickered with patterns indicating confusion. "Your vessel's approach vector violated 17 distinct quarantine protocols. Explain this transgression." The human's smile never wavered. No transgression was intended. The quarantine beacons established 3 centuries ago ceased transmitting approximately 87 years after their deployment. We assumed this indicated a formal end to isolation policies. This was a diplomatic fiction, Selna realized. The beacons had been designed to function for millennia. Either they had been deliberately disabled, or more troublingly, the humans had developed technology capable of neutralizing them without detection. The Mithran observer stepped forward, breaking protocol. "Yet you learned our language during isolation. Curious achievement." Captain Chen nodded. "We recovered linguistic data from the containment vessels left in our system. We've had generations to study your culture through the artifacts you left behind." The statement sent ripples of discomfort through the consortium delegates. The containment vessels had been stripped of all cultural and technological data specifically to prevent this outcome. "We've brought gifts," another human stated, opening a case to reveal objects that caused several security officers to reach for weapons, samples of our art, literature, and scientific developments. The Telex representative's environmental suit vibrated with alarm frequencies. "Your gifts must undergo extensive quarantine." "Of course," Captain Chen agreed easily. "We anticipated your concerns. Each item has been specially prepared for compatibility with consortium inspection protocols." Zelna caught the significance immediately. Somehow, humans had predicted not just current consortium security measures, but had designed their gifts to pass inspections that had evolved over 3 centuries of their absence. From her hidden vantage point, Selna observed the subtle power dynamics shifting. The consortium representatives, despite their advanced technology and numerical advantage, were responding defensively, reacting rather than directing the encounter. The humans, despite their apparent physical inferiority, controlled the rhythm of interaction through small, unpredictable conversational pivots. Most fascinating of all, the humans appeared to genuinely enjoy the tension, while the consortium representatives projected careful composure masking underlying stress. The humans displayed micro-expressions that Selma's translator struggled to categorize: excitement, curiosity, and most disturbing of all, intellectual stimulation. They weren't just surviving this high-pressure diplomatic encounter. They were thriving in it. Selma's unauthorized surveillance of the human delegation might have continued undetected if not for the station's routine maintenance scan. A thermal imaging sweep identified her body heat signature in the ventilation system, triggering a silent alarm. 3 security officers extracted her from the maintenance duct with efficient precision. She expected immediate detention. Instead, she found herself in the office of Diplomatic Coordinator Neth Alar, a respected Silvari whose bioluminescent patterns indicated amused curiosity rather than anger. "Your personnel file indicates you are a junior communications officer from the monitoring station," Neth Alar said, tendrils gently pulsing with light. "Yet here you are, hiding in air ducts to observe classified diplomatic proceedings." Zelna straightened her posture. "I wish to understand why one small vessel could cause such alarm, Coordinator." "And what have you learned?" "That we fear humans not for what they are, but for what they represent: unpredictability in a system built on order." Nethaler's luminescence shifted to a pattern indicating approval. "Precisely why I'm appointing you as technical liaison to the human delegation for the duration of negotiations." Zelna's mismatched eyes widened in surprise. "But my clearance level is irrelevant," Nethaler interrupted. "The established diplomatic corps is struggling to adapt to human communication patterns. You've demonstrated both curiosity and adaptive thinking, qualities in short supply among our regular staff." 2 hours later, Zelna found herself escorting 3 human diplomats on a carefully managed tour of Rigel's public sections. Her implanted translator struggled with the humans' frequent use of metaphorical language constructs and humorous subtext indicators. "Your station's environmental systems are remarkably efficient," observed Dr. Kira Yamamoto, the human scientific liaison, as they passed through the arboretum. "Though I notice the atmospheric regulators still use phase cycle distribution rather than adaptive microzonation." Zelna carefully logged this comment. How did they know about consortium environmental engineering principles? More concerning, the human had correctly identified a design limitation that most consortium engineers considered an acceptable inefficiency. "The central plaza ahead houses our delegation quarters," Zelnet explained. "We've adapted the environmental settings to Earth standard conditions based on historical records." Lieutenant Marcus Reed, the human security officer, smiled slightly. "You've done an admirable job, but your historical records are outdated. Earth's atmospheric composition has shifted over the past 3 centuries. We've adapted to higher carbon dioxide levels." The third human, cultural attaché Diana Fairchild, selected a fruit from a decorative display and bit into it without scanning it first. The fruit contained compounds mildly toxic to most consortium species. "Delicious," Fairchild commented. "Reminds me of star fruit crossed with cinnamon." Zelna's translator flagged both terms as Earth-specific botanical references with no consortium equivalent. The humans consumed various foods throughout the tour, seemingly unconcerned about compatibility or contamination. When questioned about this behavior, Dr. Yamamoto explained casually, "Our digestive systems can process almost anything organic. Natural selection on Earth favored omnivores with robust detoxification pathways." The tour culminated in a formal reception, where consortium officials mingled awkwardly with the human delegation. Selna observed the humans consuming fermented beverages that would incapacitate most consortium species, engaging simultaneously in multiple conversations, and demonstrating an uncanny ability to recall names and personal details after single introductions. Most disconcerting was their comfort with philosophical contradictions. When the Telex ambassador insisted that centralized governance was essential for interstellar stability, Captain Chen agreed, then immediately proposed a counterargument supporting decentralized authority structures. This casual cognitive flexibility violated fundamental consortium philosophical doctrine regarding logical consistency. The reception's careful choreography collapsed when the central environmental system malfunctioned. Atmospheric pressure plummeted while lighting failed simultaneously. Emergency protocols activated too slowly, evidence of systemic rather than isolated failure. In total darkness, panic threatened to erupt among the consortium officials. Then Selna noticed something extraordinary. The humans had produced light sources from personal equipment and were calmly organizing the confused diplomats into groups. "Pressure door seals are failing," Lieutenant Reed announced, somehow having diagnosed the problem without instrumentation. "We need to move everyone to inner compartments." Using improvised tools, the human delegation efficiently coordinated an evacuation that consortium emergency protocols would have required specialized teams to execute. Most remarkably, they appeared to be enjoying the crisis, working together through intuitive signals as if they'd rehearsed for this exact scenario. As emergency power finally restored minimal lighting, Selna realized the humans had organized the evacuation more efficiently than the station's own safety algorithms would have calculated possible. The emergency containment of the environmental system failure had barely concluded when Rigel Station's long-range sensors triggered a priority alert. Zelna, still accompanying the human delegation, watched as consortium officials received the notification through their neural implants. Their physiological responses, pupils dilating, skin pigmentation shifting, respiratory patterns accelerating, indicated severe distress. 3 unidentified vessels have breached the outer defense perimeter, announced Station Commander Vexlor, his exoskeletal plates clicking nervously. Configuration unknown, but energy signatures match historical records of Void Herald incursions. The diplomatic chamber erupted in controlled panic. The Void Heralds, mysterious entities that existed partially in higher dimensional planes, had been dormant for generations. Their rare appearances had always resulted in devastating losses for consortium outposts. Captain Chen stepped forward, her expression shifting to what Selma's translator identified as focused intensity. "Commander, we're detecting unusual spatial distortions in the approaching vessel's wake. May we access your sensor grid for confirmation?" Vexlor hesitated. Sharing defense systems access with quarantined species violated fundamental security protocols. But standard protocols had never successfully countered Herald incursions. Limited access granted. He finally decided. Observation only. Dr. Yamamoto interfaced with the sensor console, her fingers moving with surprising speed across the unfamiliar controls. These aren't standard Herald configurations. The dimensional resonance patterns are more complex than historical records indicate. They've evolved. "Evacuation orders issued," announced the station's automated system. "All non-essential personnel report to emergency transport base." The human security officer, Lieutenant Reed, studied the tactical display with narrowed eyes. Your standard defense grid won't be effective. The heralds are phase-shifting at fluctuating intervals that bypass your fixed shield harmonics. Captain Chen turned to Commander Vexilor. We request emergency access to your station's defense systems. The chamber fell silent. Such access would give humans control over Rigel's weaponry. An unthinkable security breach. Vexilor's mandibles clicked in agitation. Impossible. Security protocols expressly forbid. Your protocols were designed for predictable threats, Chen interrupted. The heralds have adapted specifically to exploit your standardized responses. Station alarms intensified as the first herald vessel came within weapons range. Instead of attacking, it emitted a complex energy pattern that caused several primary systems to fail simultaneously. Secondary systems activated according to protocol and immediately suffered similar failures. They've analyzed your emergency response algorithms, Dr. Yamamoto observed. Each backup system activates in a predetermined sequence the heralds have already mapped. With communications to Consortium Fleet Headquarters severed and evacuation routes compromised, Commander Vexilor faced an impossible choice. The station's destruction seemed inevitable under standard procedures. Limited weapons control granted, he finally authorized, his exoskeleton shifting to emergency coloration. Defensive operations only. What followed astonished every Consortium observer. Lieutenant Reed took control of the station's modest defensive array and immediately implemented configurations that violated every tactical doctrine in Consortium history. Instead of creating symmetrical defense patterns, he established erratic, seemingly random firing sequences that targeted dimensional weak points in the herald vessels. Meanwhile, Dr. Yamamoto reprogrammed shield harmonics to fluctuate in patterns based on mathematical principles Selna had never encountered. Prime number sequences with deliberately introduced errors, she explained. The herald vessels, encountering unpredictable resistance for the first time, adjusted their approach vectors in obvious confusion. The station shuddered as a direct hit overwhelmed one shield sector. Emergency bulkheads failed to deploy properly as cascading system failures spread through the power distribution network. Most alarming of all, the central reactor began showing signs of containment field instability. Reactor collapse imminent, warned the station's eye. Evacuation of all personnel recommended. Automated shutdown procedures ineffective. Without hesitation, Captain Chen turned to her team. Kira, you're with me. Manual reactor stabilization. Dr. Yamamoto nodded, unfastening her formal attire to reveal a utilitarian jumpsuit beneath. From a pocket, she removed a small device and pressed it to her neck with a hiss. Radiation prophylaxis, she explained, catching Selna's questioning look. Good for about 30 minutes of extreme exposure. As they moved toward the reactor section, Selna made a split-second decision and followed. Consortium training mandated evacuation in such scenarios. Reactor stabilization was considered statistically impossible once automated systems failed. Yet these humans were calmly walking toward certain death to attempt the impossible. The reactor control chamber glowed with ominous blue light, radiation warnings flashing across every surface. Engineering crew had abandoned their posts, evacuation protocols taking precedence over hopeless containment efforts. As Selna followed the humans inside, her implanted dosimeter immediately shrieked in alarm. You should evacuate, Captain Chen told her without turning around. The radiation levels are already beyond your species' tolerance threshold. Selna's inner eyelids closed reflexively against the growing brightness. How are you still functioning? Your physiology should be even more vulnerable than mine. Dr. Yamamoto moved with purpose toward the main control interface. Earth's background radiation underwent significant increases during our industrial development. We've adapted. Not immunity, but heightened tolerance and repair mechanisms. The central containment field fluctuated dangerously, its normally stable matrix showing growing instability patterns. Primary coolant systems had failed completely. Secondary systems operated at 17% efficiency, insufficient to prevent catastrophic overload. Captain Chen examined the consortium control systems with quick, efficient movements. The automated systems are following standard containment protocols, but the Herald attack specifically targeted those algorithms. We need to introduce uncertainty into the equation, Dr. Yamamoto concluded, already removing access panels from control surfaces never designed for manual operation. Zelna watched in astonishment as the humans began physically rewiring critical systems, bypassing safety interlocks that had been engineered specifically to prevent such interventions. Their movements displayed a disturbing familiarity with technology they should never have encountered before. How do you understand our engineering systems so intuitively? Selna demanded, her radiation sickness beginning to manifest as dizziness. Captain Chen didn't look up from her work. We faced similar challenges developing our own reactor technology. Different specific implementations, same fundamental principles. The revelation struck Selna with greater force than the radiation. Humans hadn't stolen or copied consortium technology. They had independently developed parallel solutions following completely different evolutionary paths. A violent tremor shook the station as another Herald attack found its target. Coolant pipes ruptured above them, spraying caustic fluid across the chamber. Dr. Yamamoto was caught in the spray, her exposed skin immediately blistering from chemical burns. She barely paused in her work. "We need to manually cycle the containment field," she stated calmly, despite her obvious pain. "The harmonic frequency needs to shift randomly rather than following programmed sequences." Captain Chen nodded. "I'll handle the physical modulators. You reprogram the control algorithms." Zelna struggled to maintain consciousness as radiation levels continued climbing. Through blurring vision, she accessed her neural implant and connected to the station's secure archives. If these were her final moments, she wanted to understand why her civilization had truly quarantined humanity. The classified files opened in her mind's eye with surprising ease. Emergency protocols automatically elevated access clearance during critical events. What she discovered transformed her understanding completely. The consortium hadn't feared human aggression. The quarantine was implemented after early exposure to human thinking patterns triggered alarming neural adaptations among consortium researchers. Scientists who studied humans began questioning foundational principles, suggesting unconventional solutions, and developing unpredictable behaviors. Most disturbing to consortium leadership, these contaminated researchers consistently found more efficient solutions to long-standing problems. Their innovations worked better than established methods, threatening the very cognitive stability upon which consortium civilization was built. The quarantine wasn't to protect the consortium from human violence, but to preserve the predictable thought patterns deemed essential for civilization's stability. A blinding flash of light pulled Selna back to the present. Dr. Yamamoto had somehow interfaced directly with the control systems, her body convulsing as she channeled electrical current through her own nervous system to manually regulate power fluctuations. Captain Chen worked furiously at the mechanical systems, adjusting physical components in sequences that violated every engineering principle Selna had been taught. Their combined efforts introduced exactly what consortium designers had intentionally eliminated from all critical systems: unpredictability. The reactor's ominous pulsing gradually stabilized. Warning indicators shifted from critical to severe, then to manageable levels. Against all statistical probability, they had prevented catastrophic failure through methods no consortium engineer would have attempted or even conceived possible. Through her pain, Selna finally understood the truth. The greatest threat humans posed wasn't destruction. It was transformation. Selna awakened in the medical bay 3 days later, her system purged of radiation poisoning through emergency cellular regeneration. The first face she saw belonged to Captain Chen, who sat beside her recovery pod reviewing data on a portable display. "The station survived," Chen said, noticing Selna's consciousness returning. "Your people are remarkably resilient, despite their rigid thinking." Zelna's translator implant had been reset during her treatment, causing a momentary delay in comprehension. The heralds, temporarily withdrawn to regroup. Lieutenant Reed's defensive innovations confuse their attack algorithms, but they're adaptive. They'll return with new approaches. A delegation of senior consortium officials entered the medical bay, led by the imposing figure of High Counselor Seth Emin, who had arrived with reinforcements from the Central Consortium worlds. His presence on a frontier station like Rigel was unprecedented, a measure of the crisis's severity. The human delegation's assistance during the Herald incursion has been noted, the High Counselor stated formally. However, the quarantine protocols remain in effect. You will be escorted back to your vessel, and, with respect, Counselor, Captain Chen interrupted, a breach of protocol that caused visible discomfort among the consortium officials. The Heralds have already penetrated 17 systems according to your own intelligence reports. Your standard defensive doctrine has failed in each engagement. The High Counselor's chromatophores flashed with annoyance. Our military response follows patterns refined over millennia off. Patterns, Dr. Yamamoto interjected, entering with her arm still bandaged from chemical burns. Exactly the problem. The Heralds have mapped your responses because they follow predictable algorithms. Your greatest strength, consistency, has become your greatest vulnerability. Silence fell across the medical bay. Such direct contradiction of leadership was culturally unthinkable in consortium society. To everyone's surprise, Zelna pushed herself up from the recovery pod. They're right, Counselor. I accessed the sealed archives during the crisis. We quarantined humans not because they threatened us with destruction, but because their cognitive patterns threatened our predictability. The High Counselor's outer membrane pulsed with agitation. You lack authorization to access such information. Yet she's correct, came another voice as the Mithran observer entered. The founders feared human unpredictability would contaminate our carefully ordered societies. Now that same unpredictability may be our only salvation against the Heralds. Reports continued arriving from across consortium space. 17 systems under attack, conventional defenses failing systematically. With clear reluctance, the High Counselor authorized the establishment of a joint command center where human strategic thinking could be paired with consortium resources. The partnership proved immediately problematic. Human suggestions contradicted millennia of established doctrine, proposing defense strategies that appeared nonsensical to consortium military leaders. We should deliberately weaken the defenses at Proxima Colony, Lieutenant Reed explained to horrified consortium commanders. Make it appear vulnerable, while strengthening Ta City outpost, which has minimal strategic value, Captain Chen added. The Heralds will detect the apparent weakness at Proxima and commit significant forces there, where we'll have prepared unconventional countermeasures, Dr. Yamamoto concluded. Each system should implement different defensive approaches, no standardization. Several ranking consortium commanders resigned rather than implement such irrational strategies. Others remained but resisted human suggestions at every opportunity, creating dangerous delays in implementation. Zelna, still recovering but recognized for her understanding of both human and consortium perspectives, found herself elevated to an unexpected position. Translator of human strategic concepts into frameworks consortium leaders could comprehend. They're not suggesting chaos, she explained to a gathering of skeptical fleet commanders. They're proposing controlled unpredictability. The difference is crucial. Using her outsider status, her mismatched eyes now becoming a symbol of her unique perspective, Selna developed new communication systems that bridged the cognitive gap between human intuitive leaps and consortium methodical analysis. The first test of human strategy came sooner than expected. A Herald battle group approached Proxima Colony, drawn to the apparent vulnerability Lieutenant Reed had engineered. Instead of the easy victory their analysis predicted, they encountered defenses specifically designed to counter their particular attack methodology. For the first time in recorded history, a Herald incursion was repelled with minimal consortium casualties. As news of the victory spread, the phrase human vessel DTCTED began to transform from a warning into something else entirely. A reason for hope. 117 days after the first Herald attack, Representatives from across consortium space gathered on Terminus Prime, the ancient fortress world that housed the consortium's central archives. The Grand Assembly Chamber, normally arranged in perfect geometric harmony, had been reconfigured in an asymmetrical layout that subtly reflected the transformation occurring throughout consortium society. Zelma stood before the assembled representatives, her formal attire adorned with both consortium insignia and a small pin bearing Earth's distinctive blue-green pattern. Her status as chief liaison between human strategic advisors and consortium leadership had elevated her to unprecedented influence. "The data is conclusive," she stated, presenting holographic battle analyses above the central platform. "Systems implementing human-designed defense strategies have repelled Herald incursions with 87% effectiveness. Systems adhering to standard consortium doctrine have sustained losses averaging 63%. High Counselor Zetheman, who had initially resisted human involvement, now nodded in acknowledgement. "The statistical evidence cannot be disputed. But beyond military applications, we must address the broader implications of human cognitive influence on consortium society." This was the real concern that still lingered. Victory against the Heralds seemed increasingly likely, but at what cost to the ordered predictability that had defined consortium civilization for millennia? Zelma activated her second presentation, neural scans of consortium species who had worked directly with humans during the crisis. The gathered representatives shifted uncomfortably, expecting evidence of contamination or degradation. "These comparative scans reveal something unexpected," Zelna explained. "Species working alongside humans show increased neural pathway development in creativity centers without corresponding degradation in logical processing. Most significantly, they display enhanced problem-solving capabilities while maintaining commitment to core consortium values." A Vuldar elder's crystalline form vibrated with skepticism. The original quarantine was implemented because human cognitive patterns caused unpredictable behavioral shifts in consortium researchers. "Yes," Captain Chen acknowledged, joining Selma on the platform. "But those early researchers were unprepared for exposure to different thought patterns. What appeared as contamination was actually adaptation." Dr. Yamamoto stepped forward with additional data. "Your ancestors feared cognitive instability because it threatened predictability. But our studies suggest cognitive flexibility and predictability aren't mutually exclusive. The researchers weren't becoming unstable. They were evolving." The chamber erupted in multilingual debate, some representatives recoiling at the very concept of rapid cognitive evolution, while others leaned forward with interest previously deemed inappropriate in formal settings. Lieutenant Reed, monitoring Herald movements from a tactical display, suddenly interrupted. "We have confirmation. The Herald forces are retreating across all sectors. Our unpredictable defense strategies have forced them back to the dimensional boundaries." A moment of silence fell across the chamber as the implications registered. The Heralds, a threat that had seemed insurmountable under traditional approaches, had been defeated through the very unpredictability the consortium had feared for centuries. High Counselor Zethanman rose formally. "We stand at a pivotal moment in our history. For 10,000 cycles, the consortium has valued order and predictability above all. These principles built our civilization, but also created vulnerabilities our enemies exploited." His chromatophores shifted to a pattern never before displayed in official proceedings, one indicating openness to fundamental change. "I hereby propose the formal repeal of humanity's quarantine and the establishment of a new consortium charter recognizing adaptability alongside stability as twin pillars of galactic civilization." The vote that followed wasn't unanimous. Change never is. But the outcome was clear. As the proclamation was formally recorded, monitoring stations throughout consortium space detected multiple signals that caused universal astonishment. Dozens of previously hidden human vessels decloaked throughout consortium territory, revealing that humanity had developed stealth technology capable of evading the galaxy's most sophisticated detection systems. They had never truly been contained, but had respected the quarantine out of diplomatic choice rather than necessity. 3 weeks later, Selma stood aboard the human exploration vessel Paradox, gazing out as it prepared to venture beyond known space. Captain Chen joined her on the observation deck. Nervous about being the first consortium exchange officer on a human vessel, Chen asked. Selma's mismatched eyes, once a mark of her outsider status, now symbolized the perspective that had helped bridge two radically different ways of thinking. Your mission parameters lack detailed contingency planning, Zelna noted. By consortium standards, this expedition is dangerously unstructured. Chen smiled. Does that trouble you? Zelna surprised herself with her answer. Not anymore. As the ship accelerated toward uncharted space, its sensors detected unusual energy patterns from an unknown source. The automated alert system began to form the words "unknown vessels DTHCT", but Chen calmly overrode it with a new message that captured the transformed spirit of human consortium cooperation. Need you view possibility as DTHCT?